This is Capitalize Your Finances, the show representing you, a select group of excited, ready, and fired up listeners seeking to potentially maximize your money moves and get after it. We don't settle for generic advice of always and nevers. Our currency is our intellect, and we constantly seek the logical way of likely creating advantages to potentially maximize wealth for our personal and unique situations. The show brings you this step-by-step framework to capitalize your finances in the aspects of your financial situation, and we strive to explore strategies and ideas to potentially help you capitalize on your financial decisions. We are capitalizers, and this is our show.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I am your host, Christopher A. Panayoti, the Cap and Capitalize, and today we have an extremely special and unique guest. He's a former FBI agent. He is the author of the Mammoth book. The opposite is true. I had a rip-roaring, fantastic time reading this sucker. Efren Delgado, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Captain Chris.
Yes, Captain Chris. Well, and I'll tell you, man, I've told so many people this. Your name is the coolest name of all time. Like, if there was someone that was meant to do what you did and do today, right? Your name, like if it was any other name, it would not work, right? Like if I was Efren Delgado in finance, it just wouldn't work. But because you were an ex-FBI agent, it's like, it is the most badass name of all time.
Well, there's an old show like from the 50s called The FBI, and it was Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.
Oh.
So a lot of the older generation people point that out to me.
Okay, got it.
It's spelled differently, but it's the same idea.
It's the same idea. Well, and before we dive into your book, which, as you know, even though you did not write it for financial purposes, there's a lot to unlock on the financial side of things. Give our listeners just a brief background. I know I said a bit about who you are, but you're going to do a much better job at doing it justice than I am.
Yeah, in general, I was always a kid that wanted everybody to be nice to each other, and I experienced a little bit of bullying in the beginning, so I just had the question of why do bad people do bad things, and that got me interested in psychology and criminology. I ended up pursuing a career in psychology and criminology, joined the FBI, and did national security for a season, like half my time in the bureau, chasing around spies and terrorists, which was a lot of fun. And the second half of the career in the criminal division, which is the more traditional part of the FBI that you see on TV and in books. And I was assigned to civil rights. That's hate crimes, human trafficking, and color of law, or investigating criminal cops. And I've been in the private sector for about an equal third of that whole trifecta of protecting people. And that private sector job is working as a bodyguard. So I'm either protecting people one-on-one, protecting corporations, or doing actual events and threat assessments for all the above.
Yeah. So when Capitalize absolutely explodes and we have our first event in a couple of years, you know who's going to be heading it up. Now, before we dive into some of just the black and white finance questions I had, this is going to be a more broad type of question. So when you are or were meeting or interrogating someone for the first time, what does that interaction look like, and what are the best questions that you asked that make the other person comfortable in trusting you?
So there's three different types of people. There's the bad guys you need to talk to, there's the witnesses you need to talk to, and there's the victims you need to talk to. So all of the above, I found the underlying technique that was most useful was authenticity.
Okay.
So that's true in life. But for the case of the victims, you want them to trust you, and obviously they've just been through something. So I think just being real with them, people pick up on that from their life experience, their instincts, that sort of thing. So that would be my number one, authenticity. Then they kind of open up. When I'm talking to witnesses, very similar, but a lot less sensitive. But let them know, look, we have the same goal. We have the same mission. Let's find out who the bad guys are. Let's protect the victims. And your testimony or your trust in me as a witness will be fruitful for both of our mutual goal of helping the victim and helping catch the bad guys. So I kind of phrase it that way, which would be true for investing too, and investors.
Oh, yeah.
Authenticity and empathy, which is one of the big themes of the book. And the last one are the bad guys, which are obviously the most challenging because they don't want to be cooperative. And a technique I would use often when I'm talking to the bad guys or people who I suspect is silence. So these pregnant pauses makes people squirm, and so they fill in those gaps. So that's a quick go-to tangible one, is just shut up and let them talk.
Yeah. Well, that is I remember reading, I don't have any sales training per se. It's just been all from the street, if you will. And that was something that I learned early on. If you're trying to get something out of someone and you just shut up, I don't know what it is, but people just feel like they have to fill that void.
It's uncomfortable.
It is. Yeah. And did you ever have any of those moments where you're sitting, you're trained, you're shutting up? The person across the table from you is doing the same thing. So did you guys just have like a silence off?
I guess context always matters. I don't remember having that experience because I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
And if you're actually doing an interrogation, they're uncomfortable, obviously.
Right.
So you want to increase that pressure. So silence is one of them where they fill the gap. But the other one is like we're sitting across the table, but we would be like knee to knee. Oh. And we touch knees and start to lean in. And
it's extremely intimate.
Get into their space.
Yeah.
And when they start cooperating, reward that with some distance, with some like, okay, let it out. I mean, there's some techniques that we can't get into, but in general, that's kind of the vibe. They're stressed and give them more stress until they start cooperating, then rewards the behavior, the cooperation.
I'm just laughing. Like if I had an initial meeting with a client and I just sit down and my knees are touching their knees,
right?
That'd be the weirdest feeling in the world. Right.
But your clients aren't your enemies.
No, they are not
the bad guys.
No, they are not.
So you definitely use different techniques for the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of the first retirement plans that I ever started working for. I went out with a consultant that I've worked with for years, and he has a tremendous amount of training behind him. Mm-hmm. And we both knew the art of silence. I'm not kidding you. We got to the ask, and we asked basically, hey, are you ready to do this? And I may be exaggerating this a little bit because in the moment, time moves really slow, especially when you're first starting out and you have no money or hope.
Of course.
But I would guesstimate it must have been 15 seconds of silence, which in a sales meeting, that is an eternity.
Yeah.
And I tried not to giggle because I know, okay, you just be quiet, and my buddy looks over, he's like, don't you dare laugh. It's one of those things. Now,
there's strength in that too.
There's a ton of strength. Oh, for sure. There's a ton of strength.
Because it's almost like a staring game, like who's going to win.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it also screams some authenticity. I'm thinking of like Elon Musk interviews.
Oh yeah. And we're going to get into Elon Musk later on.
I've got a chapter on him.
I know you do. Well, and I wanted to actually go off of some of the questions. So now that we know some of the questions or style of questioning, because there weren't really any questions per se, but it's just the art of it.
Yeah.
What are the things you pay attention to physically? And I want you to describe eyes. I want you to describe verbal cues and body language.
During interviews?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think I don't even know if I think about it tangibly. I really rely on my instinct, and I've got a whole chapter on instinct too.
Yes, you do.
And I think just of our background as human beings, as coming after multiple generations of ancestors who have been surviving and who made it enough to create us in our generation, means we have a lot of that wisdom within us that's logic-based. So if we just kind of start trusting our gut more, some of the logical aspects of talking to anybody starts to emerge without really being able to put your finger on it. I give a classic example, an exaggerated example in the book of instinct, where if you're at an ATM machine in Arizona in the summer and the guy behind you is wearing a ski mask, it's proper instinct to feel funny about that. So you're not judging their fashion. You're not judging somebody for what they're wearing just because they're wearing a ski mask. It's logical that they shouldn't be wearing a ski mask in the summer behind you at an ATM machine. So that same basic example is true of the little subtle ones. When you're on a date, when you're doing a business negotiation and you have a funny feeling, it's not psychic oh, you're being judgmental. It's logical, even if you can't place your finger on it. Trust that. And the more you trust it, like a muscle, the more that muscle will get refined and healthy. And the more you deny it, the more that muscle will atrophy. So I'm recommending to you and your audience, really trust your instincts because there's merit behind it. And I speak to my reader too when I'm discussing these many examples I give in the book. But in a nutshell, a lot of it's instinctual. And then the obvious ones that are that I can articulate, back to your question, is the louder somebody is, physically, visually, emotionally, and the context isn't appropriate for that, the more they're trying to hide something. So I think I've heard the term peacocking. When somebody's peacocking something, they're trying to cover something. Trying to give you an example. Here's an example. If somebody goes out 3 a.m. at a gay bar, waiting for them to come out so that they could beat that person up. Why would somebody go so out of their way to beat up a gay person at a gay bar and stalk them and do all that? There's something unusual and extreme about that position. So I contend that the opposite is true. That person's hating that gay part of themselves. They're ashamed of it. So they're attacking it by projecting that hate. That's just one example. When somebody feels incompetent with something, let's say, I'm a financial guru and look what I've done and look at all these investments I've made, and they're just screaming all this competence, but there's really no substance behind it. They're trying to hide their insecurity of awareness of the ins and outs of finance. And you could go on and on with the exaggerated examples. When the context doesn't support the exaggerated behavior, then the opposite is true, and you should trust that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Said a lot.
In that, that actually brings up a unique segue into a question I've been excited to ask you. So early on, you mentioned the concept of groupthink.
Mm-hmm.
And so first off, can you explain that? And then depending on where this conversation goes, we can maybe dive deeper.
Yeah, it's a great question. Groupthink is essentially a thought disease or lack of thought disease, and I'll explain it. But essentially, I'm trying to think, Janice Irving kind of coined that phrase, even though somebody else discussed it before that. But this is phrasing from psychology articles in the 70s. But a group of people wants to agree with the rest of the group, even if something's illogical, for the sake of fitting into the group. So if you've got a group of really intelligent, competent people,
Mm-hmm.
and one person in there, let's say it's yourself, your listener, disagrees with the consensus of the group, but they feel the sense to keep their mouths shut about it and not say anything because they don't want to be ostracized or get a rolling eye or whatever, they dismiss the logical disagreement that they might have in their head just for the sake of getting along with the group, and it hurts the group because they were probably right. So that's groupthink, when you choose the comfort of getting along with a group over the truth, the reality, or what your instinct is saying. That's groupthink. So a bigger concept of my book that leads to groupthink is what I call oil and water. Emotion and logic don't mix. They may blend, and storms come, but when it's raining and the clouds are there, we can't see each other's points of view, especially during an intense conversation, like with a significant other, for example. So you're both emoting during that time under the guise of thinking you're being logical.
Mm-hmm.
But what you need to do is let the rain clear out everything, let the sun come out, and the emotional clouds dissipate, so you can see each other's points of view afterwards without all the storm of emotion. So just keeping that in mind, that emotion and logic never mix, is huge. So wanting to fit in with a group, wanting to be comfortable over logical, is an emotional thing. If you could feel those feelings coming up that I want to get along with the group, but separate it from the logical disagreement you might have, just compartmentalize the two and decide what's a higher priority: getting to the truth, getting to the answer, helping the group, or making yourself feel better. Make that decision, right or wrong. You just make that decision, but be aware of what your thoughts are telling you and what you're executing. So in general, my mantra: assess, adapt, and overcome. But if you're only emoting, you can't assess. So I'm suggesting to the reader, just know the difference be self-aware of that, and then choose. Does that explain it?
It does. Yeah. Well, and you also, you touched a little bit on the concept of trauma.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to talk about your friend. Now, it's spelled Jal. Is it Jal or
Jal?
Okay, it is Jal. Yeah. I mean,
he has a much longer African name, but he
I
goes
know.
by
Well,
Emmanuel
and it's
Jal.
3 letters. So I'm figuring, okay, with my luck, of course, I'm going to screw it up.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so he had a quote, or there was actually something in your book. I want to reiterate that.
Mhm.
Jal revealed that logical thinking is painful to someone who has suffered great trauma.
Right.
And trauma is interesting in the world of investing. I wouldn't necessarily say planning. That would be for, another discussion.
Right.
But as an investor, generally trauma means some form of loss. And those losses are the most valuable experiences that you gain. Like, just as an example, if you bought ABC company at $10 a share and it goes up to 100, what'd you really learn other than you were probably right? Or maybe you were just more right than you thought.
Right.
Versus if you bought it for $10 a share, all things being equal, it goes to 5 or 4 or 3. And then you realize, wait a second, this is a really good company. Like that's when you really start to learn. But that's traumatic. I don't care who you are.
Yep.
So from your trainings that you acquired as an FBI agent, what are some of the strategies you use to deal with someone who has been through serious trauma?
So there's a lot to cover here because you brought up a lot of broader issues. And just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, I think generally adversity, any kind of adversity, is the catalyst to purpose, action, and success. So having said that, the whole theme is the opposite is true. Adversity sucks. Nobody wants to be humbled. And yet humility, in my opinion, is the only path to wisdom. When you're humbled, here's a quote that'll illustrate everything. Greg Laurie, a pastor in Riverside, California, said this quote, and I've been using it ever since. He said, "Fruit grows in valleys and not on mountaintops." And I just love that quote so much because it's so visual. We all try to climb our mountain, whether you're investing, trying to find a marriage partner, just any North Star goals you have, you're climbing a mountain to get there because anything worthwhile requires some level of effort. And you will eventually fall off that mountain, slip off, be humbled. Either life will humble you or you humble yourself, which I'll get into later, but that's a proactive strategy because humility is the only path to wisdom. So when you're in the valley, you're covered in mud, you're all scraped up, look around, breathe, take a moment to embrace that you've just been humbled. And look for the fruit of wisdom that's there, the flowers that are there. Start stuffing your pockets, nourish yourself so you could resume your climb now with a more refined, wise trajectory. There will be people still throwing rocks at you like, no, I don't want that person, but that's negative Nancy's. We could talk about that later. Yeah. But understand that the humility is there. You could reject it and go, damn it, the world's against me. Screw it, I give up. Stay in the fetal position and give up. But winners pursue past being humbled. They embrace what they learn, and that's to your point, being trauma of various degrees, adversity to various degrees. There's opportunity in all of it to learn and move forward. So that's generally speaking the concepts that we're talking about. Now with Emmanuel Jal's situation, I use an extreme example to make these points.
Yes,
he was literally a child soldier.
Yeah.
Imagine as a toddler, I think he was 3 years old when he first faced some of these wars. But he wrote a book called War Child. I recommend the book. But in a nutshell, severely traumatized. These kids are literally having to kill people to survive. Mm-hmm. So most of us,
I think he was like 7 or something when I was reading the book, right? Wasn't he like 7 or 8 when he had to kill his first?
I think I gave that example, but I don't know if he had anything before or after. But
yeah.
He literally had.
Let's go with it.
Let's go with that. The poor guy had to fight wars as a child before even being a teenager. So that alone says a lot. Most of our complaints is my latte was lukewarm.
Yeah.
And so that's your trauma for the day.
That was mine. So I
So
feel that.
all of us have faced trauma to some degree. And even if you literally haven't faced quote unquote difficult trauma, abuse, alcoholic parents, the big ones, then theoretically, even a stubbed toe could be traumatic because your norm is not having a stubbed toe.
Right. It's all relative.
It's all relative. It doesn't mean it's less significant to your audience or the person who's lived a relatively healthy, safe life. There's still trauma there. So the whole point is grow from the trauma. Now, a little aside, severe trauma is deeper, where you'd think the refuge would be logical thinking. And that's actually what I thought before I was talking to Jaw, my friend. And when I interviewed him about trauma, he surprised me by saying that logic is not the refuge for the severely traumatized, because logic makes you think and relive all of those severely traumatic experiences. So he found that sneaking in little bits of a good feeling just to get their foot in the door into sanity with the arts, music, positive stories, visualizing happiness, these little artistic ways to sneak in a little bit of happiness will just barely open that door back to potential logic. So once you start getting over you don't get over trauma, but you learn to manage it and you kind of cover it with good things.
Yeah.
So he's got a meditation app, and he's an international singer, and he speaks to people. And his method is the arts to get the people who have been severely traumatized to start appreciating positivity in any way. And once they gain some momentum there, the dendrites in your head start to grow, and the neuroplasticity starts to help itself. And then one day, after some progress, you could start using logic. And then it exponentially starts to really increase with positivity, and you've got hope again. So most of us don't have to deal with the severe trauma. We could just go straight to the logic part.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's all a continuum. Context always matters.
Well, and in the world of money, trauma, I'm just going to speak for myself. I have a unique relationship with it, because when times are fantastic, I am always metaphorically looking over my monetary shoulder, because you don't know when that slip up is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting. You have a year like 2022 where economically things were not great. Things were pulled back, and I was cool and calm as a cucumber. And now that things have rebounded a little bit, you're kind of going, okay, what rock is left unturned that I have not overturned? And it's interesting, because I've never thought of it from just a 50,000 foot psychological perspective.
Right.
And that's actually something that I've been really focused on and inspired, is studying the psychology of behavioral finance within people. Because you have to, it's in a slightly different context, it's a mind game. Life is a mind game.
Yeah.
And you're either going to win or lose. And if you lose, that outcome is not great.
Right. It's a mindset. And you said two significant things there. I could tell you're proactively humbling yourself by thinking about what's under the next rock that could destroy my business, which means you're proactively staying humble. And my chapter 16 is power is a natural corrupter unless you insert humility. So you're inserting humility at every left turn, which is great. But the human default, the path of least resistance is, look how wonderful I am. This is great. I've got it under control. I don't need friends. I don't need God. I don't need anything. This is great. I'm my God. And that's the opposite of humility. It's stubborn pride. We all need an ego just to accomplish anything, but not a stubborn ego. And so that's how I differentiate just having an ego, being confident in yourself and your decisions and your thoughts and your plans. But a stubborn ego is what I define as pride. That's the antithesis of humility. So when you're proactively seeking humility, you don't need to get in a car crash and have your femur broken in half or be diagnosed with cancer or lose your business before you're humbled. You're seeking it out. And strangely enough, I don't think it's so strange, that humility is going to keep giving you the wisdom you need without having to fall off the mountain. Yeah. Even if you slip, it won't be this devastating fall. Yeah. So that that's why I like Greg Laurie's metaphor so much. We could visualize like the different steps we're talking about. And okay, you slipped on a little rock. Efren, humble yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Let me resume this trajectory instead of like, oh, that rock was my enemy and didn't have to be there. And then you just end up falling off the mountain. So
yeah,
you're proactive about that. Yeah, I guess I made those 2 points with the power. Success is a power. So good looks, money, success, all those powers are potential corruptors unless you proactively humble yourself.
Yeah.
But you've been doing that. So I think that's the answer. Is always keep that in
I've really
mind.
struggled with the good looks part because I have to remind myself, humble yourself, humble yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would be your weakness. So
That is.
gotta,
I wake up every day. I'm like, gosh, like
look at
this
that
is
mirror.
really good.
Who's better looking, the mirror reflection or me? Those are your thoughts.
No,
right?
actually, the real thought is I wake up and I'm tired and disheveled, and I just look in the mirror and go, "What?" And that's it. That's all I ask.
That's
you know,
good. You got the wisdom out of it.
I do. Yeah. Well, I speaking of wisdom, so I want to transition into your chapter on Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there have been books out there written on Elon, PayPal, all that fun stuff. But if there was one perfect chapter that summarizes his life, you wrote it. I mean, it was dialed. And so briefly talk about, because obviously we could dedicate a whole episode to Elon. Elon, shout out if you're listening, and of course you have nothing else going on. We'd love to have you on the show.
I don't think
but
he's too
I
busy.
digress. So yeah, he's not too busy. I want you to briefly talk about his trials and tribulations. And I'm curious, what were your greatest takeaways in studying Elon Musk?
So like I said, I like to use extreme examples to encourage the reader that those same dynamics can be brought to our more regular lives. And Elon Musk, who's obviously he's like the Einstein of our generation,
Mm-hmm.
just a A-type personality, accomplishing a lot with multiple accomplishments from a diverse sect of industries. He utilizes humility all the time, whether he knows it or not. But by nature, he's a humble guy. And people would often think it's the opposite because he's so successful. But he was severely bullied as a child, severely meaning he was hospitalized probably more than once from the beatings he took in South Africa where he grew up. And South Africa in the 80s was a very intense place, very violent place.
I've heard it's pretty intense now.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. The world is intense.
Yeah.
But again, I think that adversity, you could either resent the world and become a villain, or you could grow from it, embrace the humility, and learn from it, which is the wisdom part we were just talking about. So he's also speculated of himself that he's on the spectrum to some degree.
Yeah.
And I mentioned a couple quotes that his mom, talking about Elon as a young child, that he would zone out and just kind of be in his own world for a while. And like you could snap your fingers, try to get his attention, but he was just kind of in a thought zone, which on the surface looks like, oh, what a weird kid. And so that's going to attract bullies who are cowards. I do want to talk about that later, about the whole bully dynamic. But so he got targeted by these little weird staring habits he had, which are really deep thought habits. And just being an intelligent person, he's going to have these kind of outliers that make him stand out from the crowd, so he'll be targeted. But those same skills of being able to focus that later allowed him to succeed in these really difficult arenas hurt him as a child, but gifted him, ironically, with the adversity of being bullied and being questioned, being thought of as different, which are for a kid, that's all traumatic. So I use him as an example that somebody who dealt with severe adversity, overcame all of it despite his weaknesses, despite his flaws, despite his injuries, and overcame them and actually developed, ironically, resilience, which is what every winner needs, because every entrepreneur is going to face like, oh my gosh, we are not going to succeed. This is terrible. We just lost everything. They're going to face those. But winners proceed past that after falling off the mountain several times, and they keep going towards that summit, that North Star at the tip of the summit that you could see best from the summit. It's there. So in a nutshell, Elon Musk has so much adversity, not just from childhood, but in every single business he's done. And I lay it out in the book. I got a lot from Ashley Vance's awesome biography on Elon Musk, but I summarized it for the reader just to get to the points of how these severe setbacks, he grew from them, and how the reader and your audience can also grow from your own setbacks, and to be tactical and strategic about it. And the nice little side benefit to all of that is you become a nice person. You become empathetic. And I refer to that as sophisticated empathy. It's not just empathy where it's like, I care about somebody else's feelings or I hope they're having a nice day. It's really deep, thoughtful, purposeful. I want to put myself in their position, empathize with what they're going through so I could understand them better. And that's important for the good guys and the bad guys. Mm-hmm. Just understanding other people and where they're coming from and knowing that they want to be heard and understood is such a benefit for your audience, for my reader, because then you suddenly understand why people are doing things, why they interact the way they are, and where their motivations are coming from. So if their motivations are sincere, keep going forward with that person. If their motivations are insincere, just watch out. You don't have to cut everything off, but just watch out.
Well, and this actually segues into something that you may be able to help me with live. So one of the truths that reading your book, it's obvious, but it's also not so obvious, is the fact that most people shouldn't know everything about you. Right. And personally, as you have probably come to realize as we've gotten to know each other, I struggle with this because I'm all about full disclosure. But at the same time, if I ever withhold anything, I feel like it can come across as if I'm hiding something.
Right.
And so how do you balance that art?
Well, I think we both have good guy syndrome. And a lot of your audience probably
GGS.
Yes. That's good. I'm going to coin that.
You use that.
GGS, yeah. But I think that's a problem for a lot of the good guys is we feel like we owe the world everything and we don't deserve anything in return. And that also goes with like, I start out, I think I put this on my website, not in the book, but maybe I put it in the book. But in general, if you're human, just realize this, audience. If you're human, you're mortal. And if you're mortal, you're flawed. You have imperfections. And ironically, your human imperfections make you who you are, for better, for worse. And the longer you live, the more regrets you're going to have because we're just human beings and we're flawed and we make mistakes. We have vices, we have enemies, and all kinds of obstacles in our lives. That doesn't make you any less of a person. It's what you do with adversity, what you do with your mistakes, what you do with your failures that will determine your future. So you simply have to choose where you want your life to go. And the naysayers, the people who are so weak, I call them the negative Nancys. The people who are so weak and frightened to experience risk are going to be envious of those who are willing to make themselves vulnerable, willing to risk investments, willing to risk just pursuing their life goals. And so they'll try to pull you down, whether it's unconscious or conscious. Those enemies, which are sometimes family members and sometimes friends that you've known for 30 years, you would have been 2 years old or 3 years old 30 years ago. But in a nutshell, people you've known all your life aren't always your closest allies. So be honest with yourself, be honest with the reality of the world, and realize not everybody has your best interest. In fact, I dare say most people don't have your best interest. That's why, and that's controversial, but that's why the people who do support you, who love you, who encourage you, who back you up, who are part of your actual wolf pack, are by definition special because they're unlike most people on the planet. Mm-hmm. Most people are out for themselves. So accept that reality and really embrace and reward the people who are backing you up. So the people who are supporting you, the people who are loving you and backing you up, couldn't care less about your imperfections, your past flaws. So to that point, it's unnecessary to rip off wounds that have healed and keep scraping at scabs that you want to put in your rearview mirror. Dave Ramsey, I think it was Dave Ramsey that says your rearview mirror is smaller than your windshield because there's a reason for that. Stop looking back so much and focus on what's important, looking forward. And I'm a big supporter of that because I'm well aware from dealing with bad guys all my life, from terrorists to tyrants to bullies to murderers. Like that's an extreme. Most of us don't fall under those categories.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just the not so nice family member at the Christmas dinner or the not so nice colleague that are trying to pull you off your wall. And just know that they're coming from a place of weakness, not strength. On the Uber ride over here to your building, I was speaking to a Sudanese Uber driver, and he was having to deal with, we got to talking, and he was saying how a lot of Black Americans tend to be racist towards him. And that sounds it's very frustrating and embarrassing as an American myself. But I was trying to encourage him that anybody who's mean to you for your ethnicity and who you are is coming from a place of weakness, not strength. So not to jump too far ahead, but I compare bullies, criminals, tyrants, the not so nice neighbor to chihuahuas barking at the doorbell. When the doorbell rings, it's yap, 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 yap. They're trying to project strength and bravery, but the opposite is true. They're not wanting you to see their inner weaknesses, their inner vulnerability. Meanwhile, your audience, the German Shepherd asleep in the living room, could get up, eat the bad guy, go back to sleep with a full belly, no worries, right? It's just really encouraging. And so just know that the good guys are stronger than the bad guys. Doesn't mean they're not dangerous. They're still dangerous, but you'll be ahead of it. You could avoid danger. The guy with the ski mask in the summer at the ATM machine, avoid it. Oh, my phone's ringing. I'm going to wait to go to the ATM. Or this date's giving me a funny feeling. I'm going to slip out. I don't care about hurt feelings. My life is more important to me. Trust your instincts. Know that the bad guys are weaker and you are stronger so that you could overcome those types of adversities and avoid them.
Yeah. Well, I will say I'm still stuck on being impressed that you covered that much ground in your Uber ride, because it is about 15 minutes. I mean, you guys got real deep real quick, but I would expect nothing less from you. Now,
thanks.
One of the struggles, this is a more monetary question. Mm-hmm. One of the struggles people have with money is that they get into their own heads. And what are some of the best techniques for people to get out of their own minds?
That's great. So I give the metaphor of like, as human beings, we're all individuals. We're part of society as part of a group, but we're also individuals. And we're always individuals first. So whether we like it or not, we view the world from an egocentric point of view. So I give the analogy of like, we all look at the world through a fishbowl. So imagine like a helmet fishbowl where we've got the water inside. We're looking at the world through this blurred, obscured vision of our own perspective, which is okay. So just to make that clear, it is okay to live from that egocentric point of view. But the other aspect to that is if you want to understand the world outside of your egocentric point of view, outside of your fishbowl, you have to look out of that fishbowl and really go so far as to dive out of it into the ocean view. There's a whole ocean of information and people out there that we really need to proactively, deliberately seek out, or we will be stuck in our fishbowl. And so there's two aspects to that. Self-reflection is vital. We have to really honestly look at ourselves inside in order to understand ourselves before we can understand anybody else. So that's number one. But when you start obsessing about your own thoughts, it's like firing a gun inside of a bank vault. It's just going to ricochet and probably you're going to tag yourself. So, or firecrackers, a little less violent, but
yeah, we could use gun.
Yeah, okay.
Gets the point across.
So gun. Yeah. Or yeah, it gets the point across, and we'll injure ourselves when we obsess on that. That's what neurosis is. You're so self-obsessed that that egocentric point of view almost becomes rancid, and you really need to proactively think outside yourself. That's a humbling act too, by the way. Thinking outside yourself, thinking about other people, thinking about society before yourself. It's like an advanced version of thought. So it's something to seek out so you understand other people. And ironically, thinking about others will help you because you understand other people, and then you could navigate your own thoughts that way. So one example I give in the book is when you start to self-obsess, don't just look outside of the fishbowl, literally like shatter it. Grab a hammer and shatter it so you force yourself out. And there's tangible ways of doing that, which are the same tangible ways to be humble. So life doesn't have to humble you. You're humbling yourself. So acknowledging a higher power is a humbling act, even if it's difficult. It is more logical. Gratitude is another tactical way to get outside of your fishbowl. Just being thankful for the things you have, even if it's simply as I'm able to breathe today without a respirator. I'm able to eat a meal today, knowing there's people outside the world or in other parts of the world that don't get to eat today. And then literally serving other people, doing things for others will help you get out of your own thoughts. If you're self-obsessing, proactively do things for other people without expecting anything in return. And that humility will start to just pour in wisdom. And that wisdom will get you out of your funk and suddenly put you back on your trajectory back towards your North Star goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember early on in my career, I was at it was like this advisory council board meeting, and it's a nonprofit that I don't support anymore locally, but I used to. And the general manager equivalent or president or whatever.
Cool.
I was telling him about what my weeks look like. And I remember because I'm high on life with what I do, as you know.
You are.
And he looked at me just deadpan going, what do you do for fun? And I thought to myself, what do you mean? Like, I am on cloud 9. Like, yeah, I have to get up super early. At the time, I'd get up at 4:15. I'd say my prayers. I'd go work out at the local gym. I would get to my office by 6:30, research, calls, networking event, sleep, repeat.
Yeah.
I did that for years. Now, you can't do that forever. But looking back, like some of those moments were like the time of my life. And I remember he asked me that in the middle of it. And I'm going, well, what do you do?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just, I think it's good.
Did he have an answer?
Did he have an answer?
Yeah.
No, not really. Because I mean, you fire it back. I will say this though, that was a moment where I knew there were two outcomes. Either one, I am screwed up in the head, or two, I'm doing something right. And the answer ended up being both. But it's one of those things where as I was reading your book, thinking about it, kind of committing to what you know is right, and getting out of your own way.
Yep.
And just reminding yourself, okay, it's very black and white. I just need to do it. When I thought about that question, I was thinking about it because on the investment side of things, it doesn't happen really for amateur investors, but I've had some guests on my show, and the people that I've interviewed, they don't have this issue because they've mastered it.
Right.
But I would say people that are professional investors, you want to talk about overthinking and overanalyzing, and it's to a detriment. And so I'm hopeful that our listeners that are listening in now know, when in doubt, it's like, so my brother and I grew up golfing, and my wife took up golf a year and a half or 2 years ago. And I remember Ty and I were at lunch, and I was laughing because my wife would ask me all these questions, and we haven't had to think about certain golf shots for years. It's just, you get up there, oh, I'm X amount of yards away. Oh, the wind's blowing left to right. Oh, I take this club, and it's all second nature. Yeah. And so sometimes it's like, once you know enough, it's just swing, just let it go. I wanted to talk about your chapter, The Seed of Wisdom. So one of my favorite quotes, not only in that chapter, not only in the book, but maybe of all time, quote, "Pride is ignorance, humility is the seed of all wisdom." Now, in your work as an FBI agent, that takes on a meaning that can literally mean life or death. So I was wondering how you blocked out the devilish pride in your line of work so listeners can take the mental model and use it in their financial situation. So how did you do that?
I think in general, whether I was a kid or in the FBI or my post-FBI career as a bodyguard and threat assessment person, the pattern is the same. These are human dynamics. And a lot of times we self-sabotage because our past, we let make people feel like they don't deserve it. Like, the survivor's guilt is a real thing. If there's an earthquake somewhere and somebody's friend or family member passes away, but they survive, people start hurting themselves as though they didn't deserve to live. And that's a real phenomenon. It's a type of post-traumatic stress. But people do that in less dramatic circumstances where they're listening to a relative growing up like, who do you think you are? And you'll never be anything. And that brings investors, business people, and people who have these North Star thoughts of like, I know I would be great at this, but they keep self-sabotaging. It hurts them. So I'm bringing that up because I don't want that to have as much power as it does to a lot of people and to a lot of your listeners and my readers. That's a real thing for like good guy syndrome. I don't deserve this, which is BS. I edited that one.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So humility is the only path to wisdom. I said that, in the chapter you're referring to, because I just see it as every example: Elon Musk, Abraham Lincoln, Marcus Aurelius, any successful person your audience can think of right now, who's giving, competent, and just has their ducks in a row. Haven't you noticed? I'm talking to your audience here that they are humble and they're giving. And then the opposite is true. Think about all the naysayers in your life. I'm talking to your audience that keep, judging, over criticizing. Who do you think you are? And do you think you're better than us? All that kind of stuff. They're coming from a place of weakness. And if you stop objectively and look at their lives, you will see their lives riddled with weakness or codependency on something. So I'm just encouraging everybody to embrace their humility. Allow yourself to surround yourself with other humble people because they're probably the competent ones. And one of the ways, power is a natural corruptor, like I've mentioned. So having a badge, FBI badge, police badge, that's one form of power. We talked about the good looks. That's another form of power. Women, men, whatever. That's another form of power. Money, success. You could think of all kinds of forms of power. Marcus Aurelius literally was the most powerful person in the planet. And he said, one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, is, it's possible to live a good life even in a palace. And what he's referring to is, people would on the surface think, you live in a palace, of course you have a great life. But what he's saying is, my tendency, my default with all this power is to be corrupted by it. And how many emperors, presidents, leaders, tyrants of the world can we think of where their default is, I'm going to have a harem of sex slaves and mistreat the people and just all this corruption, because that's the path of least resistance. It takes effort to humble yourself. It takes effort to be humble, especially when you don't have to. Yeah. So when you have all the money and power in the world, you don't have to humble yourself, but you will be corrupted. So Marcus Aurelius' point is he sought out proactively humility, like what's in that chapter. And he wrote meditations for himself. Those are his own private notes that somebody published. And I read and I quoted in my book because they're so rich.
Yes.
And Abraham Lincoln has the same story, which I have another chapter with him dominated in the chapter. And Elon Musk. I mean, we could go on and think about the people in your own lives that have lived great lives. And I guarantee, that's a bold statement, I guarantee those are humble people.
Capitalizers, this episode is sponsored by the best-selling book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. Regardless of where you're at in your financial life, whether you're just beginning to express interest and commitment to your personal finances, at the pinnacle of your career, winding down into retirement, or thinking about your legacy for future generations, this book walks you through every step of the way so you can succeed on your terms and with your own values and passions guiding you. After reading this book, you will officially have Christopher A. Panayotou, the Cap in Capitalize, in your back pocket, guiding you in detail through every step of the way so that you can take charge of your finances, not the other way around. Head on over to Amazon.com today and start capitalizing your finances to the fullest with this incredible book, Capitalize Your Finances, the how-to financial framework that takes you from compoundingly clueless to monetarily magnificent. And now, back to the episode.
That's saying a lot due to our regulation too. The G word is that's a big word.
Yeah. So you give it a disclosure.
Yeah.
Guaranteed, not guaranteed.
Yeah, guaranteed, but not guaranteed. Now,
Yeah.
before, because I actually wanted to talk about Abraham Lincoln, but before that, I had more of a business question for you. And you had a quote by Winston Churchill, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking. I can only imagine some of the things that you went through in your career. But what are some of your best techniques to keep going, even if you're going through hell?
Remembering your North Star. And the more, let me think I could phrase this. Well, I'm going to back up. Viktor Frankl, he was a psychoanalyst, which is like kind of Freudian psychology, focusing on the unconscious. He was a psychoanalyst who was also a Holocaust survivor. So in his book, The Meaning of Life, he was discussing like the other prisoners in these concentration camps, and he would recognize somebody's given up when they start smoking. They would suddenly start smoking when they gave up, and versus the winners, not the winners. I don't want to criticize anybody who was a Holocaust victim, but the people who
or a smoker.
Yeah, well, the people who didn't give up is the best way to think about it.
Yeah.
The people who had hope were helping others in some way, supporting, encouraging, thinking something positive. They had meaning. And so his main focus is the meaning of life isn't money, even love. It's meaning. And if you have meaning, you will have fulfillment. And if you have fulfillment, you'll be satisfied, and indirectly, you'll be happy. Chasing happiness is not the answer. Chasing meaning is the answer. And meaning doesn't come from things. It comes from purpose. So your audience's individual calling, their North Star goals, their purpose in life, don't let people deter you from those paths because they're meaningful. They're very likely meaningful. If they're not, you need to find a new North Star, because you're not going to find happiness if your North Star is, I want to be rich or famous, or something materialistic.
Quantifiable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you reach it.
Ironically, those things will happen when you're finding your purpose. And so at the end of the day, I'm kind of giving away the denouement of the book, but there's selfish benefits to selflessness. The more you're living for others in some way, the more you will help yourself. And if you succeed in your goals, you're also helping society, because that whole thing is the rising tide lifts all ships. If you are succeeding, you're helping society succeed. And it's an abundance mindset.
Yeah.
You're not squeezing a water balloon like, if they're successful, I'm not, and vice versa. It's true, like all these water balloons will be filled if you succeed. So don't feel guilty either, the good guy syndrome. Don't feel guilty about succeeding, because you're helping others with your success. And nobody could, give out money or food to somebody else if they don't have money or food to give. Nobody could give time or invest time or money to anybody else if they don't have time and money to donate. So you have to succeed in order to help others, but your own success will help others. And if your long-term goal is selflessness, to some degree, you will ironically be very satisfied and indirectly find happiness. Did I even answer your question?
You did. You totally did. Well, and I will say, so I've mentioned this the last couple of shows, and I promise I'm not sponsored by this, but one of our past guests, Gautam Bade, wrote The Joys of Compounding. And if you have not read that book, you need to read that book.
Okay.
It is basically like if you took Efren Delgado times a boatload of finance sprinkled with worldly wisdom, you have Gautam. So it's a fantastic book. And
Okay,
you need to read it. Yeah, and I'm kind of, Gautam's probably loving this, but I'm going like, man, like the last 3 episodes, it's just been so picture perfect, because it talks about that. One of the things it talks about in The Joys of Compounding Your Success is getting to that point, and then people realize financially, oh, I was trying to hit, and I'm making this up, $1 million, $2 million. You get to that point, and it's like, now what? And then you can just keep chasing the dollar. It's a quantifiable thing. And I can tell you, some of the wealthiest people I've gotten to meet are the most unhappy. by a mile.
Interesting.
By a mile.
So what we're talking about actually would help them.
Immensely.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, qualifiably. I mean, shoot, I can talk about that with the business or the podcasts or the book, soon to be. And, you know, it's one of those things where you do it out of the service of others.
That brings up another point. People's motives matter. Your audience's motive for whatever they want matters. So if it's an authentic motive with meaning behind it, keep going, plow forward. But if there's an ulterior motive and it's a superficial motive, it will probably hurt them. Mm-hmm. So we're in the interest of helping everybody. And with that point of view, I would encourage my reader and your audience to just self-reflect and reevaluate what your motives are and the whys of your pursuit, whatever, and it will probably change your life for the better, or at least stoke your momentum if you're on the right path already.
I want to talk about Abraham Lincoln because you brought him up, and I have a question. Okay. So you mentioned his upbringing, which, by the way, I didn't know his upbringing. I mean, it's kind of gray because there wasn't genetic testing back then or any of that, but it was a difficult one from the beginning. However, he obviously did all right, minus, getting shot in the back of the head. But he did great up until that point.
Yeah, and it wasn't his fault.
And it was not his fault, okay? And
negative name,
you could argue he was one of, if not the greatest presidents of all time. Absolutely. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Yep.
But one thing that he observed when he was studying human traits and tendencies with his partner, with his law partner, was that, and I thought this was an amazing quote, children born of an illicit union were oftentimes sturdier and brighter than those born in lawful wedlock, end quote. So when you were in the FBI, did you notice a correlation in this fact with success in whatever endeavor? And have you ever wondered if there is a correlation to one's financial success? I have a hunch about this, but I wanted to get your take.
Well, my take on that, it's more of an observation they made at their time because kids outside of wedlock were very frowned upon. Today, it's kind of accepted and people just kind of, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But at that time, it's major adversity, social adversity.
Right, and that's the point that I was getting at. Yeah,
and that is the point. So that same dynamic in today's world is pretty much irrelevant as far as adversity, essentially. Maybe not in their personal families, but back then, I think that's what that was leading towards. So he noticed that phenomenon, and what I was kind of indirectly pointing my reader towards is how adversity, inconvenience, things that aren't so kumbaya are difficult. And when you get over that, people learn, they become resilient, they become stronger, and they could use that strength to plow forward towards accomplishing goals versus somebody who has everything. Imagine a spoiled brat, like they have everything they want. And a lot of times they're unhappy people because they lack the adversity that teaches strength and resilience. They lack the adversity that helps people have that dopamine satisfaction of accomplishing goals because they didn't accomplish them. They just got the results. And then the adversity is the catalyst to purpose. They need meaning. And when everything's just handed to you, you have no meaning. So that's where the depression, the substance abuse, the angst and anger at the world comes from when you, quote unquote, have everything. That's where that comes from. People need purpose. They need meaning. And adversity is one of the avenues to bring that.
Yeah.
It all connects. Like at the end of my book, I point out how all of these concepts point to one big behavioral network that interconnects and interrelates. It's a big behavioral blueprint, like a web. It all interacts. It's not just standalone concepts. They interact with each other. And Abraham Lincoln had tons of adversity from, I really go into the weeds at how tough his life was. Just to give you a point, when he was a child and they moved outside of a slave area, they were trying to make ends meet, and Abraham Lincoln was kind of a big kid, and he had to literally chop the forest for firewood. And he lived in a 3-walled structure. I think it was Kentucky. And so the floor was dirt, and they had 3 walls. Imagine what those winters were like.
Oh.
Like no 4th wall.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
Hell frozen over.
Yeah, exactly. And, mud and constant working. And it's just, we really can't even fathom that kind of a upbringing. And then later there's certain indicators of the kind of man he was going to become when he shows empathy towards animals, when some of his friends were pouring hot coals over these small turtles and he defended them, saying that, their life is just as valuable as yours. It kind of foreshadowed him caring about people, slaves, who didn't deserve to be slaves. And those also, like the bad guys, the slave owners, who felt entitled to have slave labor for their financial gain. And I go in a little bit into the weeds psychologically as how a human could own another human. And the conclusion I came to, which is kind of true, we could generalize it to modern time today, is you have to convince yourself, a form of denial, a form of emotion, not logic, that people are subhuman or not human, just so you could actually treat them subhuman or like non-humans. So I think slave owners used the tool of denial and emotion outside of the realm of logic to convince themselves that person is not human. I'm entitled to their free labor to benefit me and my family. As wrong as it is, they didn't allow logic to penetrate. So whenever somebody is wrong and takes an emotional position, this is a groupthink kind of thing, and somebody comes in wanting to rip off that comfort blanket, that emotional, comfortable blanket of ignorance, they resent it and they hate it because the truth is like cognitive dissonance. It's painful. It's like a cattle prod in your side. And so they literally hate the people trying to convey the truth, the reality, because suddenly it's inconvenient to own a slave because you're saying they are human. Well, now I have to feel guilty about it. And now I have to potentially lose free income. I mean, that is extremely selfish. The bad guys are selfish and they're insecure and they're vulnerable. And all those negative traits is what makes bad guys bad guys. Instead of actually self-reflecting, humbling themselves, and seeking a better, meaningful life, they're using the world as fodder for their own feeling better for 5 minutes. They're like Band-Aids over a gushing wound of insecurity.
Yeah. That's graphic.
It's graphic, yeah. But it's also that visual.
Yeah.
I give those visuals in my book
Yeah.
to illustrate the emotional truth behind these concepts.
Yeah. Well, out of respect of the recorder, we're not going to talk about any bodily blood because I don't want him passing out. So,
Okay.
But
People are driving too, probably.
Okay. I will say.
Yeah.
I
So
will.
it's the FBI criminology point of view coming out.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say though regarding Abraham Lincoln and the correlation of, because you mentioned, okay, today, and this is probably going to be controversial, not that I particularly care, but
Yeah.
how it's more common today for kids to be born out of wedlock than back then. I mean, for actually a number of reasons. One, statistically, there's way more people. And then two, it kind of is what it is. I would argue to say,
It's desensitized.
even though it is maybe more accepted, ask any child that was born out of wedlock how they feel about it.
Right.
And I also bring that up too, because you look at a number of, at least a lot of people that I've interviewed, both directly and like indirectly, or even whether it's clients or friends or relationships, and you talk about their childhood, there is a huge correlation between, generally speaking, right, those that have a broken family or maybe a not traditional healthy upbringing.
Yeah.
And the amount of success that they have, it's immense. I mean, and I could go through a laundry list of people that, I mean, for crying out, shoot, Alec Ingold, the fullback of the Dolphins. I mean, he's had a wonderful childhood, wonderful upbringing, and he was adopted. And, out of respect to him, I'm not going to get into his personal story, but it's one of those things where you cannot tell me that all things being equal, that did not lead to the amount of immense success that he had getting through his adversity when he tore his ACL, all of those things. That's just one example off the top of my mind.
It's a good example. I heard your podcast with him, and I thought it was a really good one, really insightful. And I think you're right, but there's an interesting dichotomy there. And this kind of, I don't want to give too much away. I've got a concept in my book that I call that one simple notion. And it's very relevant and it is simple, but I kind of lead to it. But in a nutshell, people have options. And all this adversity, you could get in the fetal position and just give up, or you could grow from it, which is not the path of least resistance. It's kind of the winner's path. And, I quote stories in my book, but I also quote certain poets. And I love, it's Robert Frost. I'm going to butcher this, but essentially he's talking about, I took the road less traveled by.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes courage.
Mm-hmm.
And the less traveled by means it's not what everybody's doing. You're going against the grain.
Yeah.
The herd's going this way, and you're bumping shoulders and scraping knees and tripping and going against the grain.
Yeah. Well, in investing, it's contrarian investing.
Right. There you go.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
But you have to be very clear for yourself of where you're going,
mm-hmm.
what your North Star is. Humility will give you that wisdom. And no, people don't want to be humbled. I don't want to be humbled.
Right.
But I know there's value in it. It's uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable is not fun. Yeah. I love eating comfort food and watching a movie and just chilling.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to accomplish my goals doing that all day, every day. So, broken ACL, it's good to have some resilience behind that. You could get past that and many other obstacles. It becomes a good habit when you're in shape to face adversity.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that through humility and all those things.
Yeah.
So
when you mentioned health, I don't mean to interrupt you. You
yeah.
mentioned health and fitness is really big in my life and in my brother's life. And we fell in love with it at a very similar time. I think I fell in love with it first, and then he joined shortly thereafter, which is, kind of unfortunate because he looks way better. But
well, there's a pattern there, because whether you're talking about health, investing, finance, family, work, good guys, bad guys, the same patterns are there. What is uncomfortable, what takes work, teaches you, and you grow from it. And the path of least resistance, just giving in to gravity, doesn't accomplish anything. You just give into the world, and you become people who want to dominate you or take advantage of you will just pull your puppet strings because you're just giving into them. You have to resist the bad guys.
Yeah.
To some degree. And to do that takes some effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would even go a step further and say, yeah, you got to resist the bad guys. I actually think that's the pretty easy one. You also have to resist the guys that are not good enough.
Yeah. Well, it's all a continuum.
Yeah.
But like health is we just brought up health. Fasting is healthy for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is it comfortable or uncomfortable
mm-hmm.
to skip a meal or start to get hungry and crave carbs, but I'm going to have hot tea instead to stage off some of that hunger, not the cheeseburger.
Yeah.
And I love cheeseburgers and pie.
Yeah.
Some of my
we'll get some of that later tonight, maybe.
Okay, cool.
But it's funny you even mentioned fasting. I've told my brother this. I started fasting earlier this year on Sundays. Part of that is just due to my spiritual sense, right?
Yep.
Being Presbyterian. But then the other side is once I have breakfast in the morning, and if I could fast for the whole day, I would. But with medication, you want to take it with food in your stomach and all that.
And from a humble point of view, like acknowledging a higher power, you're fasting because it humbles you and it brings you closer to God. Yeah. And when you work out to be stronger and healthier, you're literally ripping muscle. Mm-hmm. I said that before, but think about all these like signs that God gives us about these truths, these counterintuitive truths that are true nonetheless. The cover of my book, can I pull it up and show the
Go
audience?
For it.
In
Go
general,
for it.
I don't know, Ty, if you could see that. That's your audience, the dove.
Mm-hmm.
You have a purpose, and that's the olive branch. The bad guys are these serpents trying to pull you off your path, and you're rising above it. I, on purpose, made my artist, this kid in Europe who's amazing. He kept wanting to make the serpent dark and scary and all this sort of thing. But I told him, no, make it beautiful. And I sent him pictures of real beautiful snakes.
Yeah.
And so he made this beautiful aqua lime color. But you probably can't look that closely. But between the scales, you see this red. It's the truth of the darkness underneath. It's the same color as the mouth. If you zoom in, or the audience could look closer, these evil things.
Or they could just buy the book and
Or
see
you
it
could buy
for
the book,
themselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
The reality is he's trying to keep you off the path. And this is not strength. This is jealousy and envy because they don't want your audience, the dove, with the purpose to succeed, because then they have to compare themselves. I don't have the guts to do what Captain Chris is doing. So I'm going to try to sabotage him so I don't feel so bad. It's selfish. That's what bad guys do. So inevitably, you will fall off the mountain, be humbled. You'll be in the valley, but all that fruit of wisdom is there. So pick it up. It's a cycle. Life is tough, and sometimes you fall, but rise up again. That's why I made it a circle. But these olives on the branch is the fruit of wisdom. Carry it with you next time you're on your way back up. Even when you're doing well, the bad guys are actually going to be intertwined in your trajectory.
Yeah.
So just be savvy about it, knowing that they're there, but be careful because they're all around you, even when you're doing well.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm never going to look at your cover the same again. And now I feel very surface level as a human because I got to think much more profoundly about this. It's a beautiful cover. We were actually talking about this right before we sat down. Before I forget, I wanted to ask, this is more of a surface level question, but you've mentioned emotion and logic do not mix.
Yeah.
And that's a chapter in your book that I could dedicate an entire episode. I could dedicate a whole series to that in the world of finance.
It's a section in the book. It's not like 3 chapters.
Yeah. And, for you, even though you are highly trained in what you do, and I know you're being humble about it, but you have to be highly trained in doing what you've done in what you do today. You cannot tell me emotion does not get the best of you because it gets the best of everyone.
Right.
And so just really briefly, what are some techniques you use when emotion is winning the war in your head, and how do you stay logical as often as you do?
That's great. I just simply accept the reality that emotion and logic don't mix. And here's a way to kind of break it down. Any decision we humans make has to have an emotional energy behind it. So even just picking up this coffee cup, I did that not for a logical reason, but for an emotional reason. And that reason is illustrating a point to your audience, and or I'm thirsty, and that's an emotional thing where I want to quench my thirst. The logical act to follow up with that emotional energy is, this is what I have to do to get a drink or to make my point.
Yeah.
So every single human decision is fueled by emotion. So emotion has its value. I don't mean to sound like I'm criticizing emotion because logic's so wonderful. If we were only logical and not emotional, our closets would be organized, we'd have our taxes dialed in, life would be boring and meaningless. And remember, my whole thing is meaning is the whole purpose of life.
Yeah.
And your North Star should be about meaning and selflessness, because you will benefit. So emotion is the energy, and logic is the trajectory. So imagine the turret on top of a tank. The gun blowing up out of that tank is the power of emotion. It's such a great visual.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't point the turret in the right direction, you're going to create a lot of damage with that passion. And think about all of our youth. We've made a lot of stupid decisions with emotion without the logic part. So one of my main points is assess, adapt, overcome. The assessment part is the logic part. Know what you're trying to accomplish, where you want your energy and your decisions to be pointed, and then execute or pull the trigger with the emotional fuel after you've pointed the turret in the right direction, and you will accomplish a lot. Let that blast be powerful but efficient, not blowing up your own house.
So groupthink is for suckers, usually.
Yep.
It's a chapter that I would imagine you get both high praise for as well as the cold shoulder.
Yeah.
For those that are easily offended, yet it is one of the most truthful things that you've written in your book. And by the way, you keep saying, I don't want to give too much away. Dude, you could talk for probably 15 hours and only get into maybe 5% of this book. So just letting you know. But I'm curious, going back to that chapter. So some people are barren for substance, yet thirsty for meaning, and they would go extreme lengths to fill this void. Yet most people that understand that they are filling a void do so not for their own benefit. And I was thinking about it from like an influencer perspective, because there's so many online influencers that, let's face it, they are phenomenal at tapping into that vulnerable emotion.
Yep.
And they just latch onto it, and they, bad pun, capitalize on it.
Right.
So what are some techniques to fill people's void while doing so for their greater good?
Yeah, another mouthful, Chris.
Yeah.
But I actually think my book is not for everybody. My book is for people who genuinely want truth. And most people hate truth. Plato said, no one is more hated than he who speaks the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So it just goes to show that the stuff we're going through today is just as true as it was back in the day. In other words, it's a human thing. You know, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. Truth is truth. Reality is reality, whether we like it or not. But a lot of reality, a lot of truth is uncomfortable. My family member's not so nice. Oh, but they're your relative. They're your blood.
Mm-hmm.
My colleague has my best interest, but why are they paying so much attention to you, and why do they keep trying to discourage you?
Yeah.
You could go on and on. So your audience wants a life beyond mediocrity. They're really wanting to go for it.
Oh, yeah.
That's my reader too. They're not the norm, but normal sucks. You have one life, carpe diem, memento mori, all that stuff. Know you're going to die. Know we're mortal, we're imperfect, but just embrace the fact that you're going to die one day, so you might as well go for it.
Yeah.
All that Dead Poet Society stuff, like carpe diem, live for today, smell the roses, make the right decisions, and when you make the wrong decisions, move past it, learn from it, grow forward. I think in a nutshell, just the main purpose of my book and your audience is to discover these uncomfortable truths and embrace them, and have that be your barometer to helping you make your decisions. Can you remind me of your question again?
Well, the reason why I asked is, you know,
I started talking and I lost.
No. You're fine. So, life is a choice.
Yeah.
I've said that a ton on my show. Brother and I have talked about it a ton. I've probably told him way too much. He earned the eye roll on that one. And it's one of those things where I look online at all of these people that are giving improper advice. Now, in my lens, it's finance, but it could be anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
I think I know where I was going.
And what's crazy is so many people out there, more so than not, are extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, how many people have you sat down with that are just concretely confident in every aspect of their life? There are people out there, but very, very few. And then there's people that aren't necessarily confident in areas of their life, but they're confident enough to know what they're not good at. And so they can admit that and all that fun stuff. Most people are very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
I dare say all people, but people have managed it so well that the illusion is they don't get nervous before the public speaking. They don't get nervous before executing the deal of the century. But the reality is there's some nervousness there. They've just learned to adapt to it. And to you and I, who are kind of, you can't see inside somebody's mind, you don't see those vulnerabilities because they've adapted to it, to their benefit, to their strength. That's what I'm encouraging your listener to do, and I even encouraged myself to do. We all have to deal with our mortality and manage it, accept it, and manage it. If you're not accepting it, if you're in denial about it, it's not in your workspace. You can't improve on it. If you're in denial about it. Ironically, and this is back to your question, the bad guys, the tyrants, the people who want to take advantage of other people, they want people to stay emotional and not logical. They want people to doubt. They want people in fear. They want people to emote and not think. Mm-hmm. Because as long as they're in that state of this emotional turmoil, they'll never accomplish their goals. They'll never seek independence, and they'll never question authority. They'll just say, yes, 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 just don't hurt me. Just don't take my warm, fuzzy blanket off. the people Plato was referring to are ironically being selfless and wanting to encourage people with truth, with reality, that no, this is what's true. This will help you if you just listen. And that's why they're so hated, because that cognitive dissonance. Don't tell me that truth. I'm comfortable with my warm blanket. So Henry said, thinking is the hardest thing there is. That's why so few people do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was awesome.
Yeah.
He accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
So as long as we keep thinking, we keep the tyrants at bay. As long as we keep emoting without the thinking part, we're almost like volunteering, like, go ahead and pull my puppet strings. I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just don't take off my warm blanket.
Well, and you definitely answered the question in an indirect way, because that's something that, whether I'm writing or doing episodes, or even in particular, just speaking to clients, it's one of those things where, okay, so many of these people, to their credit, on the tyrant side of things, they have figured out how to take the emotional unindulgence of a lot of people, and they get their hook in there. And so taking that mental model, but then just twisting it for the greater good, that was kind of my angle at that. Because let's face it,
Exactly.
like if
you
you're,
might as well turn it for good. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's so much more difficult to say than it is to do, because what's the saying? Fear sells. Fear sells.
Yeah.
Positivity doesn't. Like you never go on and watch the news and it's like, wow, everything is shining rainbows. Back to you, Tom. Like that never happens. And so it's just a good mental model, selfishly for me, to go and help people in the long term for the greater good.
Well, just remember that what fuels people's decisions is emotion. So it could be fear, where you just give in to the tyrants, or it could be love. Hey, I want to be successful because I want to improve my life, my family's life, my society's life. Yeah. Both of those are emotional. So you could tap into either one. But I think the tyrants, the people who want to take advantage of other people and oppress them, utilize the negative. And the good guys utilize the positive. Now, part of the goal of utilizing the positive emotion for people is their North Star. They want to accomplish it. You're helping them accomplish their financial goals and their personal goals indirectly with that. And if they gain ground that way, then they'll start to go into the logical part where they'll keep pointing their turret in the right direction, because we need experts like you in the financial realm to help them point the turret in the right direction. So they'll really kill it, not in a negative way.
Yeah.
They'll do great in life and with their goals.
Metaphorically.
Yeah, metaphorically. Yes. Exactly.
No one's going to go commit a murder due to capitalize your finances.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
yeah.
Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
That does. Yeah. Now, before we close out the show, I wanted to throw a little contested view your way. And one of the major points, which I personally agree with, is trusting your gut, especially when it's upset.
Yeah.
Now, the contested viewpoint is actually not from me. And I know you're a listener of the show. So one of the episodes that I was blessed to be a part of was I got to interview an author, Seth Stevens Davidowitz, who wrote a book, Don't Trust Your Gut.
I heard that one.
And have you read the book?
No.
Okay. It's a phenomenal book. It is a phenomenal book. And it was interesting. That book, as a quick side note, I was introduced to Seth by one of our past guests, Adam Cecil, who wrote Where the Money Is, one of the best financial books of all time. Shout out, Adam. And that one book, Don't Trust Your Gut, actually gave some awesome investment advice on myself that I've utilized for people, which I'm not going to give anything away. Not that I would, because of course we're heavily regulated, but I digress. For you, okay, because he wrote this book with a ton of research and backing on why it's not optimal to don't trust your gut.
Right.
So how would you go about balancing that act?
It's a great question. You read his book and you interviewed him. What's the thesis of why not trust your gut?
So the thesis is, so you've got all of these things that you would think, okay, you trust your gut, you go with it, therefore that's the right thing to do. Well, statistically speaking, that is not necessarily the most accurate. So I'll give you an example.
I get it.
Yeah. So one of the chapters, now you're putting me on the spot here, but that's fine. One of the chapters, he talks about what sport is, okay, so you got a son, right? Colt.
Yeah, Colt.
Okay, awesome. Awesome name. So not quite Chris, but that's okay. So for Colt, so is he into sports at all?
He's into running fast with a cape on. So I guess that's kind of a sport.
Got it. Oh yeah, because how old is he?
He's 4.
Okay, yeah, he's not really.
He
Okay.
identifies as Superman and Batman, but he's not quite there.
Nice. So, and by the way, great Halloween costume. So,
Thank you.
so do you guys watch sports together or?
No, right now I'm literally introducing him into like the whole Batman cartoon world. Because
Okay, got
it's
it.
essentially like, hey, go for it, protect people, that sort of thing.
So let's use a different analogy here. So were you a sports fan at all growing up?
I don't watch sports, Chris. I'll be honest with you. I
Okay.
play sports. I like soccer and surfing,
Okay.
but I get
Let's-
ADD just
So
watching
hold
the
on a
sport.
sec. Let's go with soccer.
Okay.
Okay. So you obviously love soccer.
Yeah.
All right. And soccer, I think it's safe to say it's the most popular sport in the world.
It is. Yeah. It's a team sport too.
It is.
Very much.
Right. But here's my point. So most people would go with their gut in the emotional feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with soccer. Therefore, as a child, I'm going to go pursue it in middle school, high school, select. Therefore, I'm going to get a college scholarship.
Got it.
Whereas statistically speaking, what is the best sport to, again, statistically speaking, allow your child to gain a sponsorship?
That's a great question.
Take a guess. I'll give you one guess.
Volleyball?
No. Fencing.
Oh, random.
So, and I forget what the
This is a great
stats were.
sport.
Yeah. So it was like football, the chance of like a guy playing football for a D1 school is, I think it was like 0.3 or something. I could totally be butchering this if
But
Seth
I'm
is listening.
getting the point. The logic
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah. And so, it was one of those things where I looked at it going, oh. And as an investor and as a planner, it made me sit back on a couple things that, we're not going to get into because it's super nerdy and no one cares as much as I do. But it's one of those things where I looked at it going, okay, I'm still going to trust my gut, but let me try to find out, in this case, if the opposite is true.
Yeah.
And in a few cases I did. And so that's why I was asking like that balancing act, because I do think,
Great question.
you're right. He is right. But there's got to be some gray area where you're both correct.
The path less traveled by,
Yeah.
it's because that path less traveled by has been thought through. The assess, adapt, overcome part, the assessment part is vital. And the assessment part has to take into consideration context. So what he's referring to is like, don't trust your gut, is like, just don't be emotional without the logical part, which is my argument about emotion and logic both being valuable for different ways. The emotion will execute the decision, but without the assessment part, you're going blind just because you feel good about something. I love chocolate cake and pie. I'm not going to eat it every day because I love chocolate cake and pie. That's emotional and illogical. Fasting, balanced diet, limited carbs, that's been thought through, which is not the path of least resistance, but it's also not the norm. The world is not fasting, paying attention to carbs. It seems like, because of our circle of friends and colleagues, that everybody's fasting, paying attention to workouts and what's healthy and organic food versus pesticides and processed foods. But it's not true. Most of the world is just eating what's convenient, either because of necessity or because of comfortable blindness, emotion. So I think we are both right because context, like how I start my book, context and continuum always matters. Context is what's vital here. Whereas if you're just being emotional without the assessment part, you are going to make a mistake. But if you've assessed it and then you support that decision because it's been well thought out, analyzed, I'm going to choose fencing because I enjoy it, even if it wasn't my first decision, but it's got these potential benefits later that I need financial assistance in college. Now I'm going to execute because that's been well thought out. And you could go on with the examples.
Oh, yeah.
The context was the answer. That was the gap that we needed, the thread that we needed to tie those two together.
Yeah. Well, you definitely need to read this book. And actually, I got to introduce the two of you because that would be intriguing just get together.
It was a fun pod.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. He's a great guy. Now,
Cool.
Obviously, we could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we have entered the 2-minute warning. And so before we close this thing on out, okay, where can listeners go to best support and follow you and snag a copy of your book?
Well, probably the most easy way is just Efren, EFREN, Delgado.com.
Okay.
Because there you could learn more about the book, and there's an Amazon link on Buy the Book there. There's also other options, Barnes & Noble, whatever, but that's just the easiest link, EfrenDelgado.com.
And then your Instagram?
At Efren Delgado.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure we cover all bases, man.
I think that's right, yeah. It's been a lot of fun, Captain Chris.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. And to all of you tuning in, as always, thank you so much for listening in to Capitalize Your Finances. To you newbies out there that are tuning in for the first time, welcome to the Capitalize crew. For you veterans out there, you know the drill. If you have any questions about today's episode, you know what to do. You can either give me a call, 253-214-3050, or you can shoot me an email, chris@capitalizeyourfinances.com. If you are listening in and going, man, I would love to be a guest on this lovely little podcast, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com. Shoot us a DM. My team and I look at it every single day. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Paniotu, the Captain Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Capitalize Your Finances, a separate entity from LPL Financial. Efren Delgado and any other individual or company mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with Capitalize Your Finances or LPL Financial.